The Blitz, derived from the German word Blitzkrieg, meaning lightning war, refers specifically to the sustained strategic bombing campaign conducted by Nazi Germany against the United Kingdom from September 1940 to May 1941, a crucial phase of the Second World War in which the Luftwaffe sought to break British morale, destroy industrial and military targets, and pave the way for a possible German invasion under the codename Operation Sea Lion. Yet, paradoxically, the campaign that was intended to terrorize the British people into submission ultimately hardened their resolve and became a defining episode in Britain's wartime narrative of endurance and defiance. The roots of the Blitz can be traced back to the escalating European conflict that followed Germany's invasion of Poland on September 1, 1939, which prompted Britain and France to declare war on Germany 2 days later. Over the ensuing months, known as the Phony War, little direct combat occurred on the Western Front, but by spring of 1940, Germany had shifted to a strategy of rapid conquest, launching devastating offensives through Norway, Denmark, the Low Countries, and France. By June 1940, the fall of France left Britain as the only major power actively resisting Hitler's expanding empire in Western Europe. The Luftwaffe, under the command of Hermann Göring, was tasked with gaining air superiority over the Royal Air Force, RAF, as a precondition for invasion. The aerial battle that ensued, known as the Battle of Britain, raged through the summer of 1940. Despite heavy losses, the RAF, utilizing radar technology and a decentralized command system, successfully repelled German attacks on airfields and fighter stations. When it became clear by late August that the Luftwaffe could not achieve decisive control of the skies, German strategy shifted toward bombing Britain's major cities, particularly London, in an effort to cripple its industrial capacity and demoralize its population.
This transition marked the formal beginning of the Blitz. The first major raid on London occurred on the night of September 7, 1940, when nearly 1,000 German aircraft attacked the docks and surrounding districts of East London, igniting massive fires and killing thousands. For 57 consecutive nights, London was bombed either partially or in full, as waves of Heinkel HE-111s, Dornier Do-17s, and Junkers U-88s crossed the English Channel by the hundreds. German High Command believed that sustained attacks on civilian and economic infrastructure would break the backbone of British resistance and force Prime Minister Winston Churchill's government into negotiations. In truth, the decision to bomb cities was influenced by several overlapping motives: military frustration at the failure to destroy the RAF, the need to retaliate after British bombers struck Berlin in late August 1940, and Hitler's broader desire to demonstrate to both enemies and allies that Britain stood isolated and vulnerable. Yet strategic logic and emotional vengeance intertwined uneasily. The Luftwaffe's bombing campaign, originally intended to weaken Britain's war machine, increasingly targeted civilian areas, blurring the line between military necessity and terror. Industrial regions like London's East End, Birmingham, and Liverpool were bombed because they housed factories producing aircraft, munitions, and vehicles vital to the British war effort. However, the destruction extended well beyond industrial zones, engulfing residential neighborhoods, hospitals, schools, and cultural landmarks. The raids caused widespread devastation. By May 1941, approximately 43,000 civilians had been killed and more than 1 million homes destroyed.
Nevertheless, Britain's capacity to endure such punishment was underpinned by a combination of strategic adaptation, civil defense measures, and psychological resilience. The government, under Churchill's leadership, mobilized extensive efforts to maintain morale and continuity of life despite the constant threat from the skies. Propaganda slogans such as "Keep calm and carry on," though seldom displayed publicly during the war itself, encapsulated the stoic spirit that came to define the era. The Blitz cannot be understood solely as a story of destruction. It was also a battle of endurance, logistics, and willpower. The British government and the public at large learned to adapt to nightly bombings, transforming basements, subway tunnels, and public shelters into makeshift havens. At the same time, the RAF's continued defense of the skies and Britain's ability to sustain industrial production demonstrated that air raids alone could not achieve Germany's strategic goals.
By the time the Blitz formally ended in May 1941, Germany had redirected much of its air power eastward in preparation for the invasion of the Soviet Union. Yet the scars it left, physical, psychological, and symbolic, persisted for decades. The Blitz was a failure in purely military terms, but it succeeded in forging a shared sense of unity among the British people, transforming fear into defiance and endurance into identity.
The Blitz unfolded as a series of escalating operations that reflected both Germany's evolving strategic aims and Britain's unyielding determination to survive under relentless aerial assault, beginning with London as the primary target before spreading across Britain's industrial heartlands and ports. London, as the political and economic center of the British Empire, bore the brunt of the campaign. Between September 1940 and May 1941, the city was attacked over 70 times, with the most intense period occurring during the autumn and winter months. The first Great Raid on September 7, 1940, saw the Thames docklands become a sea of fire as bombs and incendiaries struck warehouses filled with flammable materials. Eyewitnesses described a horizon glowing red from miles away, while the smell of burning timber and oil hung over the city for days. In the East End, entire neighborhoods were reduced to rubble, yet the civilian response was characterized not by panic, but by extraordinary calm. People gathered in underground stations such as Aldwych, Bethnal Green, and Elephant and Castle, where they slept side by side, sang songs, shared food, and tried to retain some semblance of normalcy beneath the earth.
The pattern of raids varied from day to day, but nighttime attacks became the hallmark of the Blitz. Sirens would wail across the city, prompting millions to take shelter, while searchlights swept the skies and anti-aircraft guns fired relentlessly at the droning formations above. The Luftwaffe's tactics combined high-explosive bombs designed to demolish buildings with incendiary devices that ignited massive fires. Fire brigades, often operating under impossible conditions, fought blazes that consumed entire streets. The Second Great Fire of London on the night of December 29, 1940, remains one of the most devastating single raids when 136 German bombers dropped over 100,000 incendiaries on the City of London, destroying 8 of its churches, the Guildhall, and countless historic structures. Only the iconic dome of St. Paul's Cathedral survived, standing amid the flames as a powerful symbol of resilience, an image immortalized in photographs that later became emblematic of British courage. While London captured much of the world's attention, other cities suffered grievously. The industrial Midlands and ports of northern England were vital targets due to their contribution to Britain's war economy. Coventry, an industrial city specializing in motor vehicles and armaments, was subjected to one of the most infamous raids on November 14, 1940. In a meticulously planned attack, over 500 bombers dropped 500 tons of high explosives and 36,000 incendiaries, devastating much of the city center and killing around 600 people. The destruction of Coventry Cathedral became an enduring symbol of wartime tragedy. The German term Coventried, meaning to annihilate a city through bombing, entered military vocabulary, reflecting the sheer scale of the assault.
Liverpool, as Britain's primary Atlantic port, faced repeated bombings aimed at crippling the supply chain that sustained Britain's survival. The Liverpool Blitz, extending from August 1940 to May 1941, accounted for some of the heaviest losses outside London. Docks, warehouses, and railways were prime targets, but residential districts also bore immense suffering. In one raid in May 1941, over 1,700 civilians were killed in a single week. Similarly, Birmingham, Manchester, and Sheffield, centers of industry and steel production, were relentlessly attacked. Factories producing aircraft components, munitions, and vehicles were hit repeatedly, yet production continued at remarkable levels, aided by rapid repair efforts and the dispersal of key facilities to rural areas. The human experience of the Blitz was defined by adaptation and endurance. The British government had anticipated large-scale air attacks before the war and had prepared a network of air raid precautions, or ARP wardens, civil defense volunteers responsible for enforcing blackout regulations, guiding civilians to shelters, and reporting bomb damage. Gas masks were distributed nationwide, though chemical warfare never materialized. The Anderson shelters, corrugated metal structures buried in gardens, and Morrison shelters, reinforced indoor steel frames, became ubiquitous features of British homes. In urban areas lacking sufficient private space, public shelters and underground stations offered refuge to thousands. The government initially hesitated to allow underground stations to be used as shelters, fearing panic and logistical chaos, but eventually relented in the face of necessity. The nightly ritual of descending into the tube, equipped with blankets, tea, and small comforts, became an enduring memory for those who lived through the Blitz.
Communication and propaganda played a crucial role in maintaining morale. The BBC provided regular updates, balancing realism with reassurance. Newsreels and photographs highlighted heroic rescue workers, while official censorship ensured that images of despair or widespread destruction were minimized. The Ministry of Information carefully curated the public narrative, emphasizing unity and perseverance. Churchill's speeches, broadcast over the radio, gave the population a sense of shared purpose. His words, "We shall never surrender," became the emotional backbone of national resistance. The Blitz also transformed the physical and social landscape of Britain. Entire districts were flattened, displacing hundreds of thousands of people. Evacuation programs, initially launched at the start of the war to move children from urban centers to the countryside, were expanded during the bombing campaign. Many families were separated for months or years, and the experience reshaped social relations, exposing class divisions and cultural contrasts between urban evacuees and rural hosts. Yet, for all its horror, the Blitz forged new forms of community and solidarity. Neighbors helped dig survivors from rubble, shared rationed food, and tended to the wounded. Women played vital roles as nurses, air raid wardens, and factory workers, further transforming gender dynamics within wartime Britain. Despite the destruction, crime rates fell and social cohesion strengthened, driven by the collective experience of danger and deprivation.
The Luftwaffe's strategic objectives began to shift over time. Having failed to cripple the RAF during the Battle of Britain, and with the invasion of Britain postponed indefinitely, the bombing campaign increasingly served a dual purpose: to disrupt production and to maintain psychological pressure. Yet Britain's decentralized industrial organization and its rapidly improving air defenses limited the effectiveness of such efforts. Radar detection, anti-aircraft artillery improvements, and the growing strength of RAF night fighters gradually increased the cost to the German side. By early 1941, British intelligence and the Royal Observer Corps had refined their ability to predict raid routes, reducing civilian casualties and allowing more efficient coordination of rescue and firefighting services. Even as the bombings intensified through the winter, the Luftwaffe's losses mounted, and the campaign began to lose momentum.
The final major wave of raids in May 1941, the heaviest single month of bombing, inflicted massive destruction on London and Merseyside, but failed to achieve any strategic breakthrough. The resilience demonstrated during these months became a defining element of British identity. While propaganda amplified the Blitz spirit, the underlying reality was one of grim endurance, a population that faced nightly terror, exhaustion, and grief, yet refused to succumb. The shared hardships of the Blitz blurred class distinctions and fostered a sense of unity that would profoundly influence post-war society.
By early 1941, Britain's defenses had evolved from desperate improvisation to coordinated efficiency, turning the nightly chaos of the Blitz into a managed system of survival that demonstrated the remarkable capacity of a modern industrial democracy to withstand sustained strategic bombing. The Royal Air Force, through the development of radar-guided interception, began to challenge the Luftwaffe's nighttime dominance. New radar systems such as ground-controlled interception and the use of airborne intercept radar in Bristol Beaufighter and later de Havilland Mosquito aircraft allowed British night fighter squadrons to locate and attack bombers under cover of darkness, gradually eroding German confidence. The integration of the Observer Corps, radar stations, and anti-aircraft batteries into a centralized command network, known as Fighter Command's Doubting System, enabled the tracking of enemy aircraft in real time, transforming Britain's defense from reactive to proactive. Civil defense infrastructure also matured. Fire brigades adopted coordinated regional command structures, and mutual assistance pacts between neighboring cities ensured rapid deployment of rescue units where devastation was most severe. The Auxiliary Fire Service and Women's Voluntary Service expanded dramatically, mobilizing tens of thousands of civilians into disciplined emergency networks. Hospitals implemented triage systems to handle mass casualties efficiently, while mobile medical units provided immediate aid in bombed districts. In parallel, Britain improved its air raid warning and public communication systems, replacing siren networks damaged in earlier raids and using coded messages to control civilian movements.
Economically, the Blitz imposed enormous strain but did not break the British war economy. Industrial production, despite localized disruptions, continued to rise throughout late 1940 and early 1941, demonstrating a remarkable capacity for adaptation. Essential industries were decentralized, dispersing production to rural areas and underground facilities less vulnerable to attack. The Ministry of Aircraft Production, under Lord Beaverbrook, reorganized the aircraft industry, resulting in an increased output of Spitfires, Hurricanes, and bombers, which would later form the backbone of Britain's counter-offensive over Germany. Transportation networks, although repeatedly targeted, were rapidly repaired. London's Underground not only served as shelter but also as a functioning transport artery throughout most of the bombing. On the psychological front, the resilience of the British population, often summarized by the term Blitz spirit, became central to both wartime propaganda and post-war national identity. Sociological studies, such as those later conducted by the Mass Observation Project, revealed a complex picture. Fear and fatigue were widespread, yet morale remained remarkably high due to communal solidarity, government communication, and a pervasive sense of moral purpose. Religious institutions, local councils, and volunteer groups organized support networks that provided food, comfort, and counseling to the bombed out. The destruction of homes and neighborhoods paradoxically created stronger community bonds as people depended on one another for survival.
The government's management of public information was instrumental in shaping perceptions of the Blitz. Censorship restricted images of death or despair, while official photographs emphasized heroic firefighters, calm civilians, and the endurance of iconic landmarks. Churchill's speeches, laced with defiance and poetic rhetoric, gave the population emotional armor.
His invocation of national destiny, portraying Britain as standing alone for freedom against tyranny, turned the Blitz from a tragedy into a moral triumph. Internationally, these portrayals helped secure sympathy and material support from the United States long before America's entry into the war. By the spring of 1941, German strategic priorities shifted dramatically. Preparations for Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, required the redeployment of the Luftwaffe's bomber forces eastward. The final major raids over Britain occurred in May 1941, culminating in the May Week bombings of London and Liverpool, which caused immense destruction but signaled the end of sustained aerial assault. Sporadic raids continued thereafter, but the intensity and frequency declined sharply. The Blitz officially ended as Germany's attention turned toward its vast eastern campaign, leaving behind a battered yet unbroken Britain.
The aftermath of the Blitz revealed the scale of devastation. Over 43,000 civilians were killed, 139,000 injured, and more than 1 million homes destroyed or damaged. In London alone, nearly every borough sustained significant structural loss. Yet the population displacement and rebuilding that followed reshaped British urban planning and architecture for generations. The post-war reconstruction effort, guided by plans such as the 1944 Abercrombie Plan for London, drew lessons from the Blitz, emphasizing open spaces, improved housing, and decentralized urban layouts to prevent future vulnerabilities. From a military standpoint, the Blitz demonstrated the limitations of strategic bombing as an instrument of coercion. Although the Luftwaffe inflicted tremendous physical damage, it failed to achieve its political or military objectives. Britain did not sue for peace, morale did not collapse, and industrial output continued to rise. The campaign revealed that modern societies could adapt to aerial warfare, blunting its intended psychological impact. This lesson would later influence both Allied and Axis bombing strategies, as the war expanded and similar campaigns were waged against German and Japanese cities. The Blitz also provided invaluable operational experience to British planners. Techniques in civil defense, radar interception, and bombing damage assessment were refined and later applied during the Allies' own strategic bombing campaigns against Germany. The concept of total war, the mobilization of entire populations and economies, reached its fullest expression during these years, blurring distinctions between front lines and home fronts.
Culturally and symbolically, the Blitz became an enduring national myth. Images of St. Paul's Cathedral standing amid smoke and ruins, of civilians calmly sipping tea amid rubble, and of rescue workers emerging from flames were immortalized in wartime journalism and post-war memory. Literature, film, and art from the period, such as the works of Graham Greene, Humphrey Jennings, and later the British realist movement, captured both the horror and humanity of life under bombardment. In retrospect, the Blitz stands as both a failure of German strategy and a triumph of British endurance. For Germany, it marked the moment when air power proved insufficient to force a decisive outcome. For Britain, it forged unity across class and region, reinforcing democratic resolve under the most extreme conditions. Historians continue to debate the balance between myth and reality in the Blitz spirit, yet there is no doubt that the campaign transformed Britain's national psyche, turning a moment of existential peril into a defining episode of resilience. The legacy of the Blitz extended far beyond 1941. In the Cold War era, British civil defense planning, urban design, and cultural identity remained influenced by the memory of those nights when the nation stood alone beneath the falling bombs.
The experience underscored the need for preparedness, adaptability, and solidarity in the face of modern warfare. It also laid the psychological foundation for Britain's later role within the Western Alliance, a country tempered by fire whose people had learned that survival under bombardment depended not only on technology or tactics, but on collective will.
Thus, the Blitz remains one of the most significant episodes of the Second World War. A campaign that failed in its immediate aims, but succeeded in reshaping the course of the conflict and the consciousness of a nation. It was at once a story of destruction and endurance, terror and unity, tragedy and triumph, the moment when Britain, battered but unbowed, proved that even in darkness, defiance could burn brighter than fire.